So when you think of the learning modalities on building these tools, how are you looking at, different learner levels? A lot of the assignments are becoming product of AI slop, right? So how do we ensure that the tools like LearnLM or Notebook LM are used precisely for learning that actually enhances the human capacity? Hello and welcome to another special episode of The Boss's Code. Learning is what defines us as humans. It's what made us survive, advance, and innovate. And the tools that we've been using to learn have evolved over the years. And the biggest shift has now arrived in the form of artificial intelligence. These tools are helping us to access knowledge and learn in ways that we haven't seen before. So, in this new paradigm, what does it mean to learn? What does it mean to teach? And what's the future of education? That's the topic that I will be decoding with Ben Gomes, the Chief Technologist at Google. Ben spends a lot of time thinking about how AI tools can be used in education and for learning. Ben, glad to have you on the Boss's Code. Thanks for taking the time out. You kind of handle the way how AI could be used in education for a billion people, right? It's not an ordinary task. As a chief technologist at Google, and as also somebody who's been part of the team since the early years in Google. How are you looking at education, AI, and learning?
Yeah, so we've been thinking about this aspect of learning for a long while now. It's been built into the use of many of our products, even historically. If you ask people about how they use YouTube, 90% will say they've used it to learn something in the last month. So learning is really an important part of like all of Google's products and always has been, because we want to give people, the best information, and often that information is used for learning. So in this age of AI, that supercharges the possibilities of what can be done with technology for learning, because it can turn learning into a much more active process. Rather than just getting something, you can engage with information in a much more active way. So we took a step back and looked at what does the science say about what's the best way to do that? There's been a lot of research into pedagogy in ways in which learning works best. So a couple of years ago, research teams at Google from Google DeepMind, Google Research came together to work on LearnLM, which was trying to build in the best aspects of pedagogy into the base of our models. So a model should not be sycophantic. It should be encouraging, but not sycophantic. It should be accurate. It should manage your cognitive load. It should be multimodal if possible. And there are many of those sorts of capabilities that need to be built into the model itself. So we built a year ago a model called LearnLM, which was tailor-made for the purpose of learning. And over the course of the last year, we've been building those features into Gemini itself. So today, using those capabilities in Gemini, we're building learning deeply across the range of products at Google. So if you look at Gemini, there's guided learning within Gemini, which brings out this way of using AI to provide really the best way to learn a topic. Of course, we'll constantly be improving this, but we have already built in a lot of the aspects we think of as are really important for learning. So it is an active process. So you're constantly engaging with the information. It follows your train of curiosity and interest. It pulls you forward towards your curiosity. We also have other products that we built called like Notebook LM. It's a wonderful product because quite often when you're learning the particular material in the context of education. You mentioned education. It's often formalized learning in the context of a particular syllabus. So in that context, you can upload your syllabus, what you're trying to learn, and get information about it. You can get an audio overview, a video overview. And for some students, that sort of transformation of the information to different forms can be really important, because it may be hard to take in that information in just a written form for some students. For some students, we prefer to hear it or to see a video about it. So those kinds of transformations can really supercharge your ability to absorb the information in a better way.
Right.
We also have an experimental product called Learn About, which can take that same information and give you a structured version of that walkthrough of that information with cues for helping you remember parts of the information. We've introduced quizzes into YouTube so that you can remember what happens, recall what you learned from the video a little bit later. We build those in collaboration, the AI generated, but in collaboration with the creators. So we built basic models that are the best in class for learning, and we're building features on top of that across the board, across all of our products. In Classroom, we're bringing all of these things together. Classroom is sort of freely available for students. We made a lot of the AI, the best of the AI, available for free to students in colleges and so on. And that allows them to use all of these tools and have them come together with their class materials and other things that they are studying.
Right.
So we are bringing this together across a whole range of products at Google that reach a huge number of people, and we're hoping to bring much better learning to all the people who use our products.
Right. It's interesting. I mean, a lot of different products are coming up. I want to understand, how are you looking at the use cases, right? I mean, the levels of learners are very different. A person at nursery learns differently. While they hit high school, it's very different. And when they get to grad school, that's totally different. So a lot of these products, the way that I'm using, are at a point in my life when I have a pretty broad sense of the world, what's happening, and what are some of the things that I should pick from here. What are some of the things I should do about some new material? And I can actually reason out and critically pick and choose the ones that I want. So when you think of the learning modalities on building these tools, how are you looking at different learner levels?
That's a really good question. I think of this as two aspects of it. We build tools that are broadly available. Now, LLMs in themselves, I think, are very adaptable to the level of the questioner.
Right.
So they change almost automatically based on the language of the questioner. But beyond that, I think there's an element of this where we have to work with the institutions, especially in the context of education. We have teacher trainings and so on available, because I think some part of this will happen in the context of teachers and of schools, of universities, and what the professors and teachers are telling the students and how they're telling them to use it. So we're working with schools and with teachers to do that kind of teacher training. We've done teacher training for over 1 million teachers over time. And I think this is not something that we will do on our own, because learning, like you said, education happens in the context of often an institution that has a particular approach that it wants to take to learning. So it's not just defined by the student themselves or the material itself. It's also defined by how the institution wants to approach learning, which can vary from one institution to another and may vary from one student to another. So I think that these tools are out for a lot of flexibility in how they're used. But I think that the actual adoption of them will depend on particular institutions and how they choose to adopt them. So there is a lot of range, and we see that range across as I talk to universities and people, professors and teachers and so on. We see a huge range in how people are using the tools.
Right. So that's the interesting part, right? The AI, the way in which it personalizes the way we learn. And therein also lies another challenge that I'm actually looking at. For instance, if you want to, the circulation diagram that you showed, and how the whole thing works in the human body, we are so used to kind of checking in with a teacher or somebody who knows about the subject a little more, so that we get a little more context about what we learn. In the case of language models, when it comes to learning, if you want to take let's say the paradigm of a library, you go to a book, you go find the book and then read it. You know for a fact that what's written is true, and you don't have to be worried about any hallucination or anything. In the context of learning through AI, how does somebody approach a text or diagram or anything and know for sure that this isn't something that was a function of hallucination? So how do you get that trust factor built into an AI learning system?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that we have done is, first of all, we work to make our models be as accurate as possible. If you've been following the metrics and so on, these models have been getting far more accurate over time. So while hallucination was a huge problem perhaps 2 years ago, it's much less of a problem today. If you look at, I'm sure that's your experience too in your own use of the models. Yeah. It's certainly my experience, right? Like these things, for most common things, actually work very accurately. I do think that for the other thing we provide in our tools is often, in many of our tools, is references back to the original material. So if you look at Notebook LM, You upload the material you want to learn from, and as you see it, it gives you pointers back into that material. And I think that's really important. So you can verify that it is true with respect to the material you're studying. In some cases, with some subjects, there are many different ways to approach the subject. And in an educational institution, you have to approach it in the way that is expected in your class.
Right.
So even if both ways are accurate, there is one that is preferred by the institution you're in. So working with respect to that institution's information is important for you to succeed. So I think uploading in things like Google Notebook, Notebook LM are actually really helpful. Likewise, in AI mode in search or AI overviews in search or in Gemini, there are references to original sources. So you can go back to the web and look at those references. Now you have to judge from those references, how much you trust them, their point of view, and so on. But that is no different than everything we had to do in the past. That was a question.
Even when that was a question. Checking with books. Yeah.
Even when you're checking with books, right? You still have to figure out what's the perspective of the person writing this book. Where are they coming from? How accurate are they? So that process of verification is an important process, and I think it becomes even. I agree that it is very important today, but it's I think a skill that students need to learn in general, and that they've always needed. It's always been an important skill of figuring out how you trust information and how do you verify information that's really critical for you.
Right.
But the underlying information we provide, we strive to provide the most accurate information with pointers into the web and to the sources so that you can verify it for yourself.
I want to touch upon the other aspect within education itself. So you have one side of learning, the other side is assignments, tests, and other things. And now what has increasingly become a problem, particularly the academics that I speak to, they say that a lot of the assignments are becoming product of AI slop, right? So how do we ensure that the tools like LearnLM or Notebook LM are used precisely for learning that actually enhances the human capacity versus becoming tools to create assignments, right? So what kind of, how are you thinking about this at least? I mean, we don't have any specific solutions right now, but how are you looking at this problem between the merits of this tool at the same time, the way these are being used?
I think this is a really powerful tool, and I think it can be used in ways that are good, that are really good for learning, and I think that's what we want to encourage. So, as I said before, we start with the basics of creating a model that is very pedagogically oriented. So if you look at guided learning and you ask for an answer, it won't give you the answer straight away. It'll try and prompt you to come to the answer on your own. It'll try and have you work through the details. So that's often a much better way for you to absorb material when you're trying to learn it. Students know that they have to pass an exam at the end, right? So they do want to learn the material. Now there are times, of course, when they, where they have to, where they want to get the answer to something. They've tried something, they don't know how to work it. And for some students, they might be able to get help from, a parent or something. My mother was a school teacher, so it is helpful for me. But many students don't have that. So if they can't get an answer, they also need to be able to get some help. In those contexts, we try and provide step-by-step explanations so you can understand where you went wrong, what you did right? So it's a matter of how you use the tools and encouraging the right use of these tools for it to be an active process rather than a passive process. And so I think that is the message to get across of students using these tools to create active learning for them so that they actually start on that journey of curiosity that will take them through to success, not just in the exam, but beyond the exam.
Two last questions. So the one is largely on the modality of learning. All of this actually is more, for instance, if I were to get the best out of AI, I need a laptop or I need a smartphone. Does it lead to a digital divide? If you don't have a good laptop or a smartphone or a good internet connection, you are actually lost out. So how do you think the question of digital divide should be handled in this particular paradigm?
I think the question of a digital divide is very interesting, and because if you take a step back, the internet in many ways was an equalizing factor.
Yeah.
So there was a time when only the people who are at the top universities had access to millions of volumes of documents and books and whatnot. Nobody else did. right? But today, as Google the internet and Google came around, everybody had access to like really an amazing trove of information. Whether you were, a king or anybody else, you had access to the same information. So it actually narrowed the digital divide dramatically, far more than you could possibly have imagined, right? And I think the same thing happens with this kind of technology. Of course, there's a need to provide access across a large number of people, but India has done such an incredible job with this. I mean, 800 million Indians today have access in online access, and that's growing really fast. When I come back to India, every time I come back to India, I'm amazed at the progress. There's just phenomenal progress. So the opportunity in India is tremendous to turn all of that access into actually active learning, right? That can actually happen across these hundreds and hundreds of millions of people who actually now have access to technology. And if you see that, and they can now, whereas they might have only had access to an answer, today they can have access to a conversation.
Right.
So the software layer itself is broadly available, but with Android, there's a lot of access to phones and the technology underlying it, which is really democratized in many ways the access to that kind of smart device as well. So I think from our perspective at Google, we really care about the democratization of this kind of access, and we'll be doing a lot over the years for that, whether it is Android phones or Chromebooks, or the software that is, whether it's search or Gemini or Classroom. Providing broad access to that has been very important to us to actually reduce that digital divide.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of potential here, though there's work to be done. Right. There are still challenges. It's not like we are fully done, but there are challenges around the world to make sure that everybody has access. We're not there yet, but I think the progress, especially in a place like India, is astounding.
Right. So
the other part of this divide, I think, is also providing access to multiple languages. Our tools are available in many Indian languages. So Gemini is available in 9 Indian languages. There's a great tool in Chromebooks called Class Tools, where the teacher is speaking, it can be closed captioned on Chromebooks for the students, not just in English or Hindi, but in any language that they understand, up to 200 languages. It can be closed captioned, and it's simultaneously translated and closed captioned. So you can imagine the kind of ways in which that reduces barrier and handles some of the complexity that a country like India has to deal with, right? With all of the richness of languages in India,
Right.
and just the sheer scale of all of it.
So what role will the teacher really play? And also, when we are seeing these kind of tools getting deeper into classrooms and the way students learn and study, that also actually kind of changes the trajectory of knowledge building. So, for instance, an 8th grader might know a little more than a 9th grader, and a 10th grader may know less than what he's supposed to know. So, how does standardization work in that sense, and how does promotions or the way a student learns change? Is that something that you're thinking about?
That's a really interesting question. The first part of your question was about just the use. What does this mean with the teacher relationship?
Yeah.
I personally believe that the teacher and the human in the learning process is really fundamental. I think almost everybody who has succeeded academically will say there was a teacher, there was a parent, there was a peer who inspired me. There is something about us as human beings where the human element is fundamental to inspiring us to learn. We learn because of other people. I deeply believe this. And you can even see that's fundamental to us as a species. I think as a species, we are the learning species.
Right.
We hand down information to the next generation, to other people, and language is fundamental in that. So I think there's a huge amount that change that enables in the learning context, but the teacher remains the human element is still fundamental. When I think about the evenness of learning in a school, that's always been a challenge. I don't think that's a new challenge. There have been students who have been ahead, there have been students who have been behind, and there have been various approaches that many schools take to that, of creating special classes for the students ahead, tracking students differently. So I think in this new age, I do think students will be able to follow their interests towards what they're trying to learn in a different way. So for instance, I was interested in chemistry. Chemistry can be an avenue into lots of other things. It can be an avenue into physics. It can be an avenue into math. if that was, we had a really good chemistry teacher in school, and he was inspiring to like a whole generation of students, right? But that ended up being my avenue into other things. So I do think that AI will allow for students to combine that personal interest, the thing that triggers something in their minds, the thing that connects with somebody else in their lives, and turn that into the spark of curiosity, that seed that can then push them forward and when into the point where they want to learn. One of the interesting things about Google's products is that most of our products, aside from Google Classroom, people come to our products because they want to learn, not because they have to learn. Right? And so we have to make it interesting for them. We have to like push that frontier of what makes learning engaging. So I do think there will be variation within a classroom. That I think that's always existed. And I think there will be ways I don't know if that's going to be a new thing, but I'm hopeful that the students who were not motivated before because they didn't find that spark will now be able to find that spark to perhaps even reduce some of that variation and reduce some of that gap that used to exist for some students who just did not find the thing that inspired them to learn. They still were forced to learn, but they didn't want to learn. Like, how do we get everybody wanting to learn?
So it kind of helps them drive them to another zone where they really have passion about, where they're really passionate about.
Yes, yes, that's what I'd love to see, right? That joy in learning, because it's something really wonderful, and I think AI with all the tools that we have been building, I think can unlock some of that for more people than before.
In India, what do you think could be a right way to kind of have a more targeted and strategic approach to AI in education?
I think one thing that's important is to make sure that people are using AI actively, not just the students, but the teachers are using it actively. We are providing, training materials, but I think it's very important to encourage the use of AI by the teachers. It can save them a tremendous amount of time. We've done a lot of studies that show the reduction in time that AI can provide for teachers. And the end result of that is that they can spend much more time with students. So first of all, then for teachers and pedagogical experts to be using AI actively to get the best benefits of AI. So deployment of AI is very important. And then the use of it correctly to actually encourage learning. Those two things have to come together. From my perspective, from a regulatory perspective, I think there are things like privacy and so on that we provide, and data privacy that we provide through products like Google Classroom. I think it's really important that the students' data is not used for training and all of the other regulations that surround that data, and that's very important. But beyond that, I think really encouraging the best use of AI in education will unlock that potential that's there, that is latent in this technology. It's just coming on board, and sometimes it takes a long while for technology to actually be adopted widely. And I think it's really important for us to push for it to be adopted well by teachers and professors in colleges and universities, around the country, around the world, actually, so that it really unlocks that potential for learning.
It's already being used by a lot of students and academics, like you just pointed out. Maybe in the next coming years and months at least, we'll be able to see a lot more on how they're using, what are some of the use cases, and what's working, what isn't working. Thanks for taking the time out, Ben. It's a pleasure. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, John. I mean, it's really exciting to think about this time. We've been building this from the ground up, from the models all the way to our products. And I hope you try out some of these products. I hope you can play with some of these things, whether it's the Gemini guided learning or Learn About, or you're using Notebook LM already. Yeah. Thank you. And see just how helpful they can be in this process of learning. All of us are learning something or the other in life. I always have my hobbies. I'm sure Absolutely. You have yours.
Absolutely.
And just see how they help you. Tell us how they're working for you.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.